I'm calling it the breakthrough moment. For JD Vance, this was it. Lock, stock, and barrel, the most perfect engagement with media, understanding of media and their purpose, which is not to engage conversation, not to get answers, but rather push narrative and shame others for the narrative that they engage, even if that narrative is also the truth. Tony Katz. Tony Katz today, what are you doing, kitten? 833-GOT-TONY, 833-468-8669, 833-GOT-TONY. JD Vance was not my first pick. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was my first pick. For VP, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I believe she would have given the straight talk. She would have connected more with women and a host of others. And you would have been like, she understands Trump. She understands the situation. This is who I want. This person is ready to go. Let's go do the thing. We got JD Vance. And I said of JD Vance, more populist than I like. But I am willing to be proven wrong. I will let him prove me wrong and show me that he is a guy ready for this. Ho, ho, ho. He showed. Now, he's still too much of a populist for me when it comes to policy. That's the fight I'm going to have. This is not about that. This is about him with Martha Raddatz. And Martha Raddatz still wants to consider herself a real down-the-middle journalist. This is not true. She has had moments, but this is not true in the main. In their conversation, they spoke about a whole series of things, did the vice presidential nominee and Martha Raddatz from ABC. And one of those things was Hurricane Helene.
Mr. Vance, I know you've been going hard on the campaign trail, but I want to start with the hurricane. During Hurricane Helene, as we heard, former President Trump suggested the federal government was not only sending FEMA aid meant for the hurricane to migrants, but going out of their way to not help people in Republican areas. Do you think that is true?
Well, Martha, what the president said is that fundamentally FEMA aid is distracted by going to illegal migrants. And by the way, good morning, and thanks for having me. We've got Republican congressmen who are on the ground who represent that area saying that they have to call the White House to get food and water to FEMA. I don't frankly think there's anything malicious going on here, Martha, but I do think that we've had an incompetent response to this particular crisis, particularly in Western North Carolina, which
we have had an incompetent response to this in Western North Carolina. The federal government has not moved quickly. The state has not moved quickly. This, according to reporters on the ground. And yes, there is a conversation to the idea that money in FEMA has not gone to American citizens first, and somehow their money has run out. These were the words of Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security. So don't get angry with me and don't call me a racist. First of all, I don't care, and then on the second hand, I also don't care. So I guess you can do whatever you want. Because what does it matter? Getting called a racist today is standard operating procedure. An honest conversation has to come forward, and the honest conversation states that this is what Mayorkas said, and there's been a slow response. Now, whether or not these areas that are Republican areas have been kept from aid, well, these areas happen to be the Western North Carolina areas, and they haven't gotten the aid. So I don't think it's purposeful that, hey, they kept it from Republicans. I think it's poor response altogether. Now, there is an election conversation in this, and it was David Axelrod who brought this up, the longtime Obama acolyte and their senior advisor. It was Axelrod saying that the people of Boone, North Carolina, right? That's this blue dot there in Western North Carolina. And those people, you know, they've got a lot of education. They'll be fine. But everybody else, those Trump supporters, well, you never know. And it is setting the stage for this argument of, hey, maybe they won't vote. Hey, maybe you slow the aid down. Hey, maybe you do this, you do that. And people say, how dare you say that, Tony? That's disgusting and it's despicable and immoral. And who do you think you are? Never let a crisis go to waste, said Rahm Emanuel. And the political left has lived that mantra. Lived it. May I add, if I didn't already add it. So I'm not surprised by anything. But in just the sheer optics of it, with Axelrod bringing it up, wouldn't you think you'd actually go a little bit over, do a little extra time to ensure the people of Western North Carolina got what they needed? And part of what they needed were the roads opened up. But you didn't send in the military right away. Well, we activated 1,500 National Guard members. If they were activated, it's meaningless. What were they doing? Why weren't they clearing roadways of mud? Getting aid then to people who needed it. When Griff Jenkins of Fox News is on this show saying that he and his team came across an 83-year-old woman who had been stranded for 5 days because of the mudslides and everything else, I'm sorry, you want me to listen to that story? Or do you want me to listen to some Daniel Dale over at CNN fact-checking everybody saying, well, they sent in the National Guard if they were all hanging out at Dairy Queen? Is that helpful? I mean, don't get me wrong. I love a good blizzard, but it doesn't help people who have been involved in floods and mudslides who can't get help and are dying. It's been a poor response. And the idea that Republican areas didn't get help happens to be Western North Carolina is a Republican area, and they're not getting help. These are facts that are not debatable. But now we get into part two. We get into the conversation of Aurora, Colorado. And this was Donald Trump in Colorado discussing what's going on with, what are they, Tren de Aragua? That's the name of the Venezuelan gang? And what is happening with gangs as a whole? What we're seeing from this group and others, I think it was the front page of the New York Post that showed some of this gang activity. And Trump, both in Aurora and in California, and in a rally in Reno, Nevada, has been discussing what is happening, discussing the violence that is being seen, and saying things like this.
I will rescue Aurora and every town that has been invaded and conquered. These towns have been conquered. Explain that to your governor. He doesn't have a clue. They've been conquered. And we will put these vicious and bloodthirsty criminals in jail or kick them out of our country, and we will be very, very effective in doing it. It's going to happen very, very fast. We're going to get them the hell out of our country.
Now, the use of the word conquered never makes people happy. But Martha Raddatz has a real issue with this and tries to take JD Vance to task.
But I want to, we played some other comments about migrants, including in Aurora, in Colorado, where Trump said the city had been invaded and conquered by Venezuelan gangs. The Republican mayor of the city said flatly the city and state have not been taken over or invaded or occupied by migrant gangs.
This is the story of Tren de Aragua, this Venezuelan gang taking over the apartment complexes. You remember the videos, you saw the videos where they're coming in with guns and have taken over. So you saw those videos like I did. We know this happened. Is the whole city taken over? No. Is Trump doing a bit of Trumpism there? Absolutely. Is there a problem? Undoubtedly so. The mayor of the city saying the city and state have not been taken over or invaded or occupied by migrant gangs. Well, they've certainly been invaded, maybe not taken over, but invaded for sure.
So do you support Donald Trump making those claims that the Republican mayor says were grossly exaggerated and have hurt the city's identity and sense of safety? I understand what you're saying, that some people left behind, but he's making these statements that the mayor is flat out disputing.
Now, before we go any further, the idea of supporting Trump's claims, you can argue that Trump over-exaggerated, but you cannot argue that there is a problem, which brings us now into this back and forth that you must listen to.
Well, Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly exaggerated.
That means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually in Aurora, Colorado, talking to people on the ground. And what we're hearing, of course, Martha, is that people are terrified by what has happened with some of these Venezuelan gangs.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened. Martha. I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border?
That is the breakthrough moment. Two things happened with just that part of the response, that moment of, do you hear yourself?
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border?
This is when CNN stood in front of a building on fire during the George Floyd riots and told us that it was mostly peaceful. Of course, Martha Raddatz is out of her mind. A handful of problems, a handful of buildings being taken over by illegal immigrants. That's a handful too many. In no other context could Martha Raddatz ever engage a conversation. She would never utilize this idea of handful as, for example, a handful of rapes or a handful of tax evaders. Never. But illegal alien gangs taking over apartments, a handful. And JD Vance is just the mocking. Do you hear yourself? I mean, do you actually believe what you're saying? Have you even registered what you're saying? And the answer is, of course, she hasn't. She hasn't come close to it. Because to register what she's saying, she'd have to admit that there's a problem and the party in power has created the issue. But she can't do that. She can't bring herself to blame those people, but rather shame on you for even noticing the issue. And it's not that bad. It's only a handful of buildings.
Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again. And unfortunately, when you let people in by the millions, most of whom are unvetted, most of whom you don't know who they really are, you're going to have problems like this. Kamala Harris, 94 executive orders that undid Donald Trump's successful border policies. We knew this stuff would happen. They bragged about opening the border, and now we have the consequences, and we're living with it. We can do so much better, but frankly, we're not going to do better, Martha, unless Donald Trump calls this stuff out. I'm glad that he did.
Breakthrough moment. That was the moment that whatever you thought about JD Vance, he can, in the debate, he outclassed Trump. In this, he outclasses the entire media apparatus. Sure, he's had great moments in the past. He's also had some flubs. It took a little while to get on his feet. And then he's done very, very well. But this is the moment of total clarity. The defense of Trump, the absolute annihilation of her position, the laughing, the scoffing, the mocking at the insanity of her position, and the hatred of the American people who noticed that a handful of buildings being taken over by people with guns is a serious issue. And how does Raddatz respond?
Okay, let's just end that with they did not invade or take over the city, as Donald Trump said. I want to move on to
just a few apartment complexes, no big deal.
A few apartment complexes that the mayor did not seem was invading the entire city.
She thinks she's right. She doesn't understand that she gave it all away. It's a complete loss. You know, there's a story out about why candidates are going to podcasts. Why are they doing interviews on podcasts? Because those questions are at least good questions. They're not this nonsense. Why would anybody do an interview with Martha Raddatz ever again? What does she bring? She can't ask a question honestly. Her question is political. So why would anybody reward her by going back on that network? Breakthrough moment for JD Vance. Outclassed everyone. And you better believe that connects with voters. I'm Tony Katz. This is Tony Katz Today.